My name is Ben Jeter. A little bit about me. Grew up here, went to A&M Consolidated, class of 2007. I went to Texas A&M, class of 2012. Got my degree in agriculture economics. Stuck around here for a few years and did some oil and gas work, and then moved to Houston, so I'm in Houston now. My family owns Threshold Vineyards out in Navasota. We're about 5 miles south of Navasota, just right off Highway 6. We do it all out there. We have about a 2-acre vineyard. We have a tasting room out there, and also are making wine out there on site. So we've got all three phases of the business out there. We opened the tasting room back in 2020, so we're relatively new to the commercial side of things. But our oldest vines were planted in 2010. So a little bit of Texas history here. Texas is home to one of the first vineyards really in North America. Kind of the history of wine in Texas and in the U.S. is it started in the east and moved west, and started in the south in Mexico and moved north. Really kind of, at least with Texas and in California, moved north with the Spanish as they settled missions and that sort of thing, and planted grapes, because grapes were a big part of European life, and they wanted to continue that while they were over here. The first vineyard was planted near El Paso in the 1660s by Spanish missionaries. And there's two things you have to mention when you give a Texas wine talk, or they take away your industry card, and that is a guy named T.V. Munson and Pierce's disease. So we'll get into that here in a little bit. But T.V. Munson he's considered the great man of Texas, and he had a big part in saving the wine industries of the French and European wine industries in the late 1800s. So he was originally from Illinois. He's a viticulturist, and he did a lot of research into Native American grape species, cataloging and crossbreeding and that sort of thing. And so in the late 1800s, there was an epidemic going across France and Europe. They called it the wine blight, the French wine blight, and it was caused by a little louse called phylloxera. And what it does is it gets into the roots and kills the roots. And this phylloxera is not native to Europe, but it is native here to America. So somehow this phylloxera made it over to Europe, whether it was on a trade ship or something like that. And it was starting to decimate these French vineyards, really just wiping them out. And so they were scrambling for a cure, and they reached out to T.V. Munson, and he sent over some rootstock that is native to America that is resistant to this phylloxera. And so what they did is they took that rootstock and they grafted on those European varieties on top of it, and were able to save the industry around Europe. And if you're not familiar with what grafting is they use it a lot for citrus plants. You can if you've got good roots on one plant and good fruit on another, you can take both those parts and fuse them together, and hopefully you get the good parts of both of those plants. And so he was able to do that, and so a big figure in the Texas industry. The modern Texas wine industry is relatively young. Really kicked off in the 1970s. Prohibition played a big role in limiting, especially the Texas industry, but really just all across the U.S. Prohibition was from 1920 to 1933, and then after Prohibition, much of Texas stayed dry, and so it really inhibited the wine industry going forward until about the 1970s is when it kicked off. That's when there was a few new vineyards that were planted, one being up near Lubbock in the Panhandle, and the other one was in the Dallas area, and they just started growing grapes, and that's really kind of where it kicked off. And then really, there were 1986, there were two Texas wines that really put Texas wine on the national scale, and we'll get into those here in a second. And that was really kind of the turning point for Texas wine. Yeah, so first off, we have Valverde Winery. They were established in 1883. They're one of the only Texas wineries still in existence that made it through Prohibition. They did that by making sacramental wine for the church. They're still in operation out there in Del Rio. Llano Estacado was established in 1976. They are one of the wineries that won that gold medal in the San Francisco competition. I think they're actually now the oldest winery in Texas now that St. Genevieve, the largest now that St. Genevieve is out of operation. Messina Hoff, a lot of you guys are probably familiar with them. They're one of the pioneers down here, especially down here in the Gulf Coast. Established 1977. They were big in really kind of steering the way that the industry has gone over the last 30 years or so. Pheasant Ridge was the other winery that was established 1978. They won a gold medal. They were the first red wine to win a gold medal at a national competition. And then Fall Creek, they are one of the first producers in the hill country over there in the Fredericksburg area, established 1979. And then this last one here, Hack Vineyards, I included them just because they've been a pioneer for the Gulf Coast, especially growing some of the varieties that are specific to our area. They're down there in Santa Fe, but Mr. and Mr. Hack, their winery was established in 2000, but they were growing grapes early 70s as well, so one of the pioneers for our area. Where we are today, Texas is currently the 5th largest producing wine state. We have just over 440 wine producers in Texas. There's 5,800 acres planted and over 65 varieties. And you can see on the bottom left there, there's about 73% of those varieties planted are red varieties, and the other 27% are white. And then you can kind of see the breakdown of where the acreage is grown in Texas, with the vast majority of it being up in the Texas High Plains in the Panhandle. There's about 3,000 acres up there. Next up, growing grapes in Texas is tough. It's not easy. Texas has a pretty, can be an extreme place to grow grapes, really anything. But we have a continental climate, so that means we get most of our rainfall in the summer months, and that rainfall brings with it a lot of challenges, especially for us down here in the Gulf Coast. That rain and wetness brings a lot of disease pressures. And I mentioned earlier, you can't do a Texas wine talk without mentioning two things. The other thing is Pierce's disease, which we'll get into here in a minute. So you got a lot of fungus issues as well. And then there's critters and pests, and everything wants to eat your vines and your grapes. The deer really like the leaves and the green tissue, and once the grapes get sweet on the vine, it's hard to keep everything else off of them because they're looking for a sweet treat. And it's not so much of an issue down here in the Gulf Coast, but the hill country and the high plains have to worry about either late spring or early spring, or late spring or early winter freezes. Most recently, they had up in the high plains, they had it was an October freeze that killed a lot of the buds, and there was still some fruit on the vines. They call it the Halloween Massacre. That was in 2019, but really lost a lot of fruit, about 50% going into the next year. So always an issue you got to deal with. And then a big hot topic right now in the industry is herbicide drift, which is not so much an issue again for us down here, but up in the high plains, a lot of the vineyards are neighboring cotton farms. And these cotton farmers are spraying an herbicide called dicamba. That is, their cotton is resistant to this dicamba, but the grapes are not. So it's volatilizing and drifting over onto the vines and stunting their growth and eventually killing them. So it's a big issue up there that could really kind of change the industry in a big way. So where do we grow? Texas has five growing regions. There's the High Plains, North Texas up there in the Dallas area, the Gulf Coast down here where we are. There's the Hill Country, which is the Fredericksburg and Austin areas, and then West Texas. And there's grapes grown in 181 of the 254 counties in Texas. The High Plains and the Panhandle grow about 80% of the wine fruit that is grown in Texas. Excuse me. So there's a high concentration of grapes in the Panhandle, but most of the winery concentration is over there in the Fredericksburg Hill Country area. And then Brazos County and Grimes County, which is where our vineyard is located, are located here in the Gulf Coast. So Texas has 8 AVAs. So an AVA, an American Viticulture area, is a federally delineated growing area. It helps to The idea is that you can know what kind of the quality of your fruit is if you recognize that AVA on the label. So there's the Texas High Plains, which is up there in the blue, in the Lubbock area. The Hill Country we've mentioned a couple times there in Fredericksburg area. And then there's a sub AVA inside the Hill Country called Fredericksburg in the Texas Hill Country. And then Bell Mountain is also located inside the Hill Country. I don't know if you can see, there's a tiny green dot right there in the middle of Texas. That's the Bell Mountain AVA. Tectoma is up on the border of Texas and Oklahoma. The Texas Davis Mountains out near Fort Davis. The Escondido Valley is just east of Fort Stockton. And then Mesilla Valley up near El Paso. There's two more AVAs that are pending approval. They've submitted their applications. And those would be the Llano Uplift and the Hickory Sands. And both of those are also inside the Hill Country AVA. The Hill Country AVA is one of the largest AVAs in the country, really. It covers about 9 million acres, so it's quite a large AVA out there. So what does Texas grow? Well, what we grow kind of depends on where you are. So there's two, I guess, classifications or considered as far as grapes go. There's Vitis vinifera, which are native to Europe, and those would be your Cab, Merlot, Malbec, that sort of thing. And then there's what are considered hybrids, which the main ones would be Blanc du Bois and Black Spanish, which we'll cover here in a second. But vinifera grapes don't grow well really east of I-10 or east of I-35. They don't grow well here in our humid climate. And so these hybrid grapes are really kind of the future for us down here in the Gulf Coast. But as far as vinifera varieties go, it seems that the warm climate European varieties, so Spain, Portugal, Italy, Rhone varietals seem to grow well here in Texas, outside of up in the Hill Country and the High Plains. I mentioned Pierce's disease a couple times. It is the big reason we can't grow vinifera vines down here. It is a bacterial disease that is caused by or it's at least transferred by a sharpshooter, which you can see up there in the top right. And what it does is it infects the plant. The bacteria infects the plant and cuts off the sap flow through the plant and eventually kills the plant. And so all vinifera vines are susceptible to that, and some hybrids are as well. And there's currently no cure. There's a lot of research going into finding a cure or at least treatment for this Pierce's disease, just because it's such a major limiting factor for us here in Texas. And so we'll to be seen how that turns out, but like I said, there's a lot of research going into it there. The top Texas varieties, or grown varieties right now, there's Cabernet Sauvignon, Tempranillo, Merlot, Mourvèdre. Blanc du Bois is the most widely planted white grape in Texas. You're going to keep hearing me brag on Blanc du Bois because it's one of the few things that we can grow down here. So Sangiovese makes a really nice wine as well. We're big fans of that one. Black Spanish, Malbec, Viognier, and Muscat Canellia. Those are the top 10 in order of acreage planted. So what grapes down here can we grow down here in the Gulf Coast? Blanc du Bois. Blanc du Bois is a hybrid variety that is a very versatile grape. You can make a lot of different styles of wine with it, and it makes a high quality wine. And it's a relatively hardy plant, very vigorous, and a good high yielder. Black Spanish is the other main hybrid grape that you'll see grown down here in the Gulf Coast. It's also called Lenoir, and it's really a workhorse. And it's when we had the big freeze in 2021, we lost about 90% of our Blanc du Bois crop, but we had a better year for our Black Spanish than we did in a long time. So it was just kind of a weird year. Yeah, it's just a really easy, not easy grape to grow, but you can it's reliable. And it makes doesn't make a great just dry table wine. It's got some a little bit high acidity, but makes a great candidate for a port style dessert wine and some sweet wines. And we made a really nice sparkling wine with it this year. So I think you'll continue to see some kind of I guess experimentation and into different styles of wine with that grape. Blanc du Soleil is a newer grape that was released in 2022. It's a grape that I don't have a ton of familiarity with. Just like I said, it was recently released, but I know that a lot of people in the industry are high on it. It has a little bit more disease resistant than some Blanc du Bois, and seems to make some really nice wines as well. These are a few other commonly planted grapes down here in the Gulf Coast that are mostly used for blending for either color or aromas or some aspect that I like. And those would be Champanelle, Herbamont, Victoria Red, and Lamanto. And there's an exciting time for us down here in the Gulf Coast with what is kind of collectively called the Walker varieties. These are varieties that were developed by Dr. Andy Walker out at UC Davis in California. And he's a geneticist and a viticulturist out there. And his kind of work over the last 20 to 25 years is developing a grape that's resistant to Pierce's disease but has some high quality vinifera characteristics to it. So in 2020 they released 5 varieties. There were 3 red and 2 white varieties. And they range anywhere from 94 to 97% vinifera makeup. So you're getting some real high quality vinifera style wines that are resistant to Pierce's disease. So there's not a whole lot of wine made from these grapes commercially available yet, just because they were only planted in 2020. But the wines that I have tried are showing some real promise, and so we're kind of excited to see where that grows. And out on our vineyard, we have some Caminari Noir, the first one there on the list, and we're planting a little bit of Passante Noir this in a few months or so. I wanted to touch on the labeling just real quickly about when you see a Texas wine on a label, what does that mean? So up until 2021, you only had to have 75% Texas grown fruit in your wine to call it a Texas wine. The other 25% could come from out of state, and you could still call it a Texas wine. And so there's been a big push recently in the industry to really kind of promote 100% Texas wines, and really kind of, if we're going to make a name for ourselves as an industry, we need to really kind of prove that we can grow some good fruit. So as of 2021, the new law was passed that really kind of narrowed that down a little bit and made it so that when you see either a Texas county or AVA or vineyard on that label, you know that it has 100% Texas wine or Texas fruit in it. So it kind of narrow the most why they want. If you see a county designation on the Texas wine label, you know that 75% of that fruit comes from that county, and the other 25% has to come from Texas. And it kind of goes down to 85% if you see an AVA, which is that American viticulture area, 85% of that fruit has to be from that AVA, and the other 15% has to come from Texas. And it gets a little bit smaller with a vineyard designation, 95, and the other 5% from Texas. So for example, if you see Brazos County on that label, you know that 75% of that fruit was grown in Brazos County, and the other 25% comes from Texas. So where do we go from here? I think that the Texas wine industry is young, so I think you're going to see a lot of growth, whether that be more acreage planted, more vineyard or more wineries opening up. I think there's going to be a lot of investment in all sides of the industry, even from some government investment funding. I think we're going to continue to grow and grow, just because there's a lot of high quality wine that can be made here in Texas, and in Texas we like to do things big and brag about it. So I think that you're gonna keep doing that. And I think specifically for our area down here, you're going to continue to see research into some Pierce's disease-resistant varieties, and you're going to see some high-quality wines come out of those varieties. So with that, I just wanted to say, if you have not had Texas wine in a while, I would encourage you to go out and try a little bit. The wine, just since I've been involved in the industry over the last 8 or 9 years or so, has gotten exponentially better. So if you had Texas wine a while ago and didn't like it, I would encourage you to go out and try it. Or if you haven't ever had Texas wine, go out to a local vineyard and ask some questions and talk to the guys. We love talking about this stuff, and it's fun for us. So, yeah.